All right, welcome back. We'll continue on here with our investigation of the Ottoman Empire and its kind of ascent to predominance and exertion of influence in the Middle East and beyond. So, again, it is going to be under the command and the authority of the Sultan Mahmud II that is going to lead to an kind of uh, he is going to benefit from the fall of the Byzantine Empire during his reign at his hands, the hands of his army. He had called for a holy war against the Byzantines. This means that he was truly committed in his efforts to focus all the resources of the Ottoman state in an effort to erase or eradicate the Byzantine Empire and its influence. He was able to do so by amassing an army of hundreds of thousands, using modern technologies such as cannon, um, you know, siege weapons in order to breach the city's defenses, some of which had stood since antiquity, dating back to the first century um, AD. And also, the end of the Byzantine Empire was also key to, in many cases, the acting as an immediate trigger for the launching of the Renaissance in Western Europe. In many cases, those local inhabitants besieged within the city of Byzantine itself, Byzantium, or Constantinople, I should say, were uh, relocated to places like Rome and the Italian peninsula. When they did that, they brought with them their cultural heritage, the books, the philosophies coming from places, from ancient Greece, and in this way, it provided a kind of seedlings for cultural reconnection. The antiquarianism that I mentioned that was characteristic of the Italian, later to be the European Renaissance. This refamiliarization with lost, you know, um, thinkers and kind of cultural roots of ancient Greece that were kind of foundational to the Western world. Now that was becoming much more accessible as a result of the fall of Constantinople. So if you're one who looks for silver linings, that could certainly be one of them coming out of this experience in 1453. The Ottomans, having consolidated control, began to benefit from the exchanges between the East and Western spheres. Again, growing rather rich from the lucrative trade that took place between Europe and the Asian continent itself and eastern areas of it. And with that wealth and affluence, Mahmed began to uh, order the construction of key palaces, such as the Topkapi Palace, completed in 1459. This was the royal residence of the Sultan and his family and inner kind of circle of courtiers in Constantinople, um, which became the new administrative center for the empire itself. There on the succeeding slide, there are kind of images of the richly decorated interiors using kind of a host of mosaics. I mean, it was just every surface was kind of a mosaic tapestry, and in many cases, uh, it was really in the years in and around 1453 and after. Where the Ottoman Empire begins to rival Eastern European neighbors, specifically the Hungarians, the Habsburg dynasty, um, of the Holy Roman Empire and governing over areas which included parts of what is today not only Hungary but also Austria as well, and also beginning to interact with the Muscovite populations coming out of what is today areas of Russia. Indeed, by 1529, the Ottomans lay siege to the city of Vienna itself, the today's capital of Austria. This would mark the furthest penetration of Islamic forces into eastern areas of Europe. This would be the first of two sieges. There would be a second campaign that would be launched in the 17th century, both of which, the first here in 1529, the other in the early 1600s, ended in failure for the Ottoman Turks. The Ottomans also expanded themselves eastward and into not only the Levant region, as I mentioned, but also across the swath of North Africa itself, which is where we'll turn attention. So, uh, with regard to its eastern flank, the Ottomans began to butt up against a competing empire known as the Safavid Empire. This was an empire orienting itself and kind of centered around the Persian plateau, what is today primarily Iran. They practiced the Islamic faith as well, but where the Ottoman Turks were Sunni Muslim, the Safavid Empire and predominantly its predominant population were Shiite Muslim. So they practiced a different version of Islam, and it was these two groups, Sunni and Shiite, that were at times, um, very abrasive towards one another and would result in conflict. So these antagonistic relations between Ottoman Turks and the Persian people of the Safavid Empire could result in, you know, um, devolution into warfare itself. It's also interesting to note, and we'll get a little more into this when we turn attention to the Indian subcontinent. But in the Indian Mughal Empire, they also practiced Islam, or that was a very prominent religion, and they practiced Sunni Islam. So you almost have this kind of sandwiching like effect of Ottoman Turks practicing Sunni Islam, the Safavid Empire practicing Shiite Islam, and then farther to the east, the Mughal Empire practicing Sunni Islam. So this made for a pretty contentious part of the world in many respects. The Afghan people what is today Afghanistan, or think in terms of more central areas of Asia itself, began to rebel against the Safavid rule that had been preoccupied with imposing Shiite principles. Um, and so any instability, any either internal insurrection in the case of the Afghans rising up in rebellion against the Safavids, or any type of uh, instability or weakness, perceived weakness, could trigger this opportunistic kind of conflict, or again devolution into war itself. So the Ottomans here were in an area of the world in which they had to be almost constantly be on guard against any internal insurrection or strife, as well as any kind of infringement on the frontiers of their borders. When that happens, and that kind of pressure cooker type of environment meant that the Ottomans had to be under constant vigilance, which means that they had to expend a good deal of wealth and energy in order to kind of preserve the status quo within their borders as much as possible, and take advantage of any opportunities that might arise elsewhere. And because of this, the Ottoman Empire was uh, could benefit from that, but then also suffer at the hands of it because it was so contested almost all the time. the Ottomans managed to move into areas of uh, perceived weakness. This meant that they were able to, with relative ease, to move into North Africa, what is today, parts of Egypt and beyond. Think Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, into Algeria, uh, places as far afield as Morocco itself. In 1517, the Ottomans managed to defeat the Mamluk Turks, which I'll talk about. This before I forget. This is the Topkapi Palace here. You can see kind of a real uh, warren of various apartments and complexes, compounds, even enclosed parks and courtyards, um, contributing to a sense of kind of isolation and elitism within the Sultan family, and again the inner court itself, inner advisors and such. It was almost kind of a self-sustaining like compound. In the interior, you can see, as I mentioned, the richly kind of decorated mosaic interiors here, rich colors and chips of pottery and colored glass to catch the light and reflect it, giving a pretty awe-inspiring type of experience. So this is a pure demonstration of the wealth and affluence of the empire itself. The Ottomans, as I mentioned, in 1517, they managed to subdue the Mamluk Turks in the Arabian Peninsula. And with that, they gained possession of Mecca, the holiest site in the Islamic world. The very next year, 1518, they were able to consolidate control over all of North Africa. In India, we have it's serving as the land in which the philosophy slash religion of Buddhism was founded. This dates all the way back to about the year 500 BCE, founded by a man named Siddhartha, um, who taught the means of escape from the world of suffering and rebirth, um, to nirvana, to attain um, a manner of existence that was outside of the birth death cycle in paradise or nirvana itself. This is a state of peaceful release, again, from that cyclical nature of human morality, or excuse me, mortality, through embracing a twofold way of life: withdrawal for meditation and personal religious um, epiphany or experience, combined with a strict morality and self sacrificial altruism. So, this was a religion that was predicated on meditation, on inner contemplation and inner enlightenment achieved through tranquility, and again, meditation, but also embedded within that or coexisting alongside it was a sense of moral authority, moral order, moral consciousness, and deprivation on the kind of creature comforts, or surrounding oneself with an elevated standard of living, that you would sacrifice um, personal comfort, um, for a greater, again, sense of attaining inner peace, tranquility, and enlightenment. This philosophy, this religion, Buddhism, would spread from Eastern India over the intervening um, millennia to envelop all of the East in the East Asian world, including not only South Asia, but also move into China and Japan as well. So, India, in many respects, is going to use its kind of cultural influences to a great degree, and they would indeed be quite potent. In and around India itself, you also have in political in the political sphere, the rise of the Timurid Empire. Um, this was founded by a man named Timur Gurkhan, or uh, Timurlane. You can see the rough kind of era of his reign from 1370 to 1405. In essence, the Timurid Empire and Timurlane himself were uh, able to seize control largely as a result of filling a vacuum of power left by the decline of the Mongol Empire, or the vestiges of it. The Timurid Empire, for its part, is going to emerge from what is today, again, parts of Afghanistan. Timurlane was able to derive his authority by tracing his genealogy back to Mongol roots, even to Genghis Khan himself. And that became necessary to serve as a source of legitimacy for his claim to power, and for um, others to follow. By 1405, Tamerlane expanded his empire to include what is today Western Central Asia, Afghanistan, northern parts of India, parts of Iran, Anatolia, and the Eastern Mediterranean. But what's interesting about the Timurid Empire and Tamerlane himself is that this was not something that was able to be sustained far beyond Tamerlane's own uh, death. And this was pretty characteristic of autocratic systems of authority, that transitions from one ruler to another were highly contested, often violent, chaotic, and as there was no clear delineation from who was going to serve as the successor from one autocratic leader to the next. That was not only characteristic in this part of the world, but really is more kind of characteristic, emblematic of the system of government, the autocratic um, nature of absolute rule itself. And it's, again, characteristic of human nature, you might say. Um, the idea of, contested authority, and also identity with it. During his lifetime, Tamerlane emulated Genghis Khan's policy of um, exacting retribution against those populations that resisted his invitation to be included and kind of incorporated within the Timurid Empire. For those that did submit, and submit peacefully, he was relatively lenient, which paralleled in some cases Ottoman policy, this idea of trying to administer over a multicultural state. Um, and we'll see that to some degree in other parts of the world, and in the human experience in world history itself. Following in the footsteps, by and large, of Tamerlane in the Indian subcontinent, you're going to have the rise of Zahir Uddin Muhammad Babur, who, again, reigning from about 1526 to 1530, was going to use some of the same methods to legitimize his rule. For example, his father was a descendant of Tamerlane himself. Babur's mother was a descendant from Genghis Khan and Khanate ancestry. And again, Babur himself would use this kind of lineage, this pedigree, in order to anchor his own legitimacy, and then kind of, um, you know, again, much in the footsteps of Tamerlane, use it as a source of legitimacy. In 1504, Babur was successful in conquering Kabul, what is today the capital of Afghanistan, And by 1519, about the same year that Martin Luther in Europe, and we'll talk about the Protestant Reformation in Europe in next week's uh, lectures, roughly about the time that Martin Luther was drafting his 95 Theses, his complaints against the Roman Catholic Church, Babur himself begins a 7-year campaign bent on subduing northern parts of India. And in 1526, at the Battle of Panipat, Babur overwhelmed a larger opposing army, again, being a beneficiary of adopting technological advantages such as the use of cannon and muskets. Um, he is able, in the wake of the success at the Battle of Panipat, to conquer Delhi. And when he does that, Babur establishes the Mughal Empire, which you can see lasting in excess of 200 years. This would be an Islamic empire that would encourage collaboration and association with Muslims from the Middle East. Again, it's Sunni Muslim in orientation, therefore, it had almost a natural affinity and alliance, at least kind of along religious cultural lines, with the Ottoman Turks. Merchants and specialists from the Mediterranean world, the Eastern Mediterranean, from the Ottoman sphere, migrated to the Mughal Empire to form an Indo-Persian cultural system, which served to act as a core ruling elite class within the Mughal Empire. This would this importation of kind of cultural commitment and cultural influence um, was one that worked to form connections with localized indigenous power structures. Again, that there was an acquiescence to trying to recognize that they were governing over a complex um, rank and file society, and that they were willing to concede to those differences of identity to a certain degree. And that's where we get into, we'll see this time and again, I think, is that within world history and the human experience, historical experience, that those who wish to expand influence and governance, power and authority, um, usually it's in their best interest if they do so through a means of concession, through a means of negotiation or compromise, to allow for this kind of amorphous or oscillating kind of status quo, where people can define themselves and begin to operate in their own interest within the confines of a state-like structure. In states that are more rigid, more autocratic, more, in some cases, monolithic or homogenous, and begin to try and enforce that kind of model, um, you're going to see that they may be dominant, but usually their dominance has a shorter lifespan. What's interesting, also kind of in the human experience in the Mughal Empire experience, is that because in the in this context of the Mughal Empire, and because imperial succession is largely determined by heredity um, and inheritance, this meant that you could, even within the same family, from generation to generation, you could have different interpretations, and you can have these swings from maybe more of a nod to multicultural peaceful coexistence to more autocratic forms. And so there could be a large degree of inconsistency. Babur's son, Humayun, struggled to maintain the empire. Um, It was becoming increasingly threatened not only by domestic but as well as foreign threats. At one point, Humayun himself, a Sunni Muslim, was forced to flee to the Safavid Empire in Persia, um, which was again a Shiite oriented empire. And when he arrived there, Humayun himself was forced to convert to Shiite Islam in order to gain support from the Safavid Empire to support his return to power in the Mughal region, and to take back his own empire, in essence. And he did that. He was willing to compromise his religious convictions in order to retain or regain his political legitimacy and authority. He did that with humility, but he nonetheless did that. And again, that's not um, unique. I mean, we're going to see when we turn attention to the political aspects of the Protestant Reformation in Europe, you're going to see some of the same behavior by heads of states of Europe when we get there. So be sure to keep this in mind, um, when considering these actions that Humayun himself took, these kind of matters of convenience that he took. In order to you know, return himself to power. With regard to internal or domestic threats, Humayun was, your textbook mentions that uh, there was dissension growing within the ranks with regard to the increasing amounts of institutionalization that was taking place, the standardizing of legal codes, laws, local customs, the imposition of the Mughal state into the more everyday lives of the empire's subjects. Um, that the imperial kind of authority was beginning to infringe on the local autonomy of provincial rulers that might have ambitions of their own, and they began to push back against Humayun's sovereignty. It is for these reasons, again, kind of more aggressive forms of autocratic, you might say, or centralized control over or within centralized or multicultural states that again serve as an excellent example as to the stresses um, that I mentioned just a few moments ago. With regard to foreign affairs within the um, Mughal Empire under Humayun's uh, reign, you have there were more there were two types. One was immediate, that is right on the direct borders, the contiguous borders of the Mughal Empire itself, and then there were those that were more distant. With regard to immediate concerns, we turn attention to the Vijayanagara Empire, located in the southern portion of what is today the Indian subcontinent. In this empire, you have a consolidation of power, um, adhering to the philosophy, the religion of Hinduism. This was a non-proselytizing religion based on orally preserved texts, an orally preserved text known as the Veda, which was later recorded in the Bhagavad Gita. Um, it was based on concepts of realizing and abiding by a single reality, interpreted differently by other religions. So that um, Hinduism was, in its estimation, a true expression and reflection of a reality that other world religions had tried to interpret in their own way. So, um, Hinduist faith argued that that's what the main goal of the world's religions was focused on achieving, is trying to interpret this reality. Of course, Hinduism, um, as you might say, with regard to any other world faith, believed that it had the true, correct kind of interpretation of that reality. How was that determined? What was it predicated upon? Well, the tenets of Hinduism included beliefs in a universal determinism. Um,